I'm Jo Sharrock, head of Shrewsbury High School, and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you to join us for the third of our Women Mean Business events. We're really excited that by going online, it has enabled so many of you to join us and for us to reach many, many more girls. And particular welcome to all of our GDST sister schools out there from across the land. It's a real pleasure to have you with us alongside our own students tonight. So the purpose of our Women Mean Business talks is to raise aspiration and to empower girls to go out into the world confident and ambitious. Over the course of these talks, we will bring you women who mean business from all sorts of careers, disciplines and businesses, and they will share with you their expertise, their insights and their experience. Now, of course, tonight's talk focuses on women in the world of law, and we are very excited to be hosting a truly impressive and accomplished panel. We welcome 5 brilliant women from the field of law, each of them highly successful in their chosen field, and I'm sure you join me in saying how privileged we feel that they have given of their time, which is precious indeed, to share their experiences and their wisdom. Each of them has their own unique story. Each of them is at a different stage in their career, and each of them will have a unique insight into what it means to be a woman in the law business. And for the young women who join us for this talk tonight, who perhaps aspire to a career in law, I think this is the most fantastic opportunity to hear from those who are living that experience. So welcome to all of our guest speakers tonight. We're so looking forward to hearing from you shortly, hearing of your expertise and perhaps your advice for the young women who join us. We're going to hear from each of our guests in turn, and then we're going to save all of our questions up to the end for our panel discussion and Q&A. So hopefully you've got your Women Mean Business pad and your pen ready so that you can jot down questions as you listen. And then if you could pop them in the chat once we've heard from all 5 of our speakers, I will endeavour to get through as many of them as we possibly can. We hope we won't have any technical issues, but if we do, please bear with us and I'm sure we will get things back on track should anything go awry. And so to business. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Hephzibah Egede to speak with us this evening. She is a dual qualified lawyer and an LLB programme director at the Cardiff Metropolitan University. Prior to joining academia, Dr. Egede practiced as a commercial lawyer in Nigeria, and she's also worked as senior lecturer in law at the University of Buckingham. She's been involved in numerous research projects, focusing on energy law, community rights, and the reproductive healthcare rights and gender equality, participating in many expert groups and task forces. In short, she is an incredibly busy and active woman, making a huge difference to the communities and the people that she works with. And we are privileged indeed that she has agreed to open tonight's event for us. Dr. Egede, welcome. The floor is yours. Dr. Egede, I think you might still be on mute. I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself.
Oh dear, that
it's
happens
okay.
sometimes.
It's a common problem.
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Jo. I also want to thank Gemma and all the staff and students for this kind invitation to share this very important talk on Women Mean Business, just talking about our legal careers. So thank you very much. I do have some PowerPoint presentations, and I'm just wondering if anyone will be sharing that for me.
I'll share it for you now. I'll put it up for you now.
That's great. Thank you very much. So what I'm just going to start off with is just sort of sharing about I'll start off with sharing about my childhood dreams, what I dreamt about when I was a child, what I wanted to be. And then I'll move on to just a bit of my background, my educational background, and also what I've done in another part of the world called Nigeria, a Commonwealth nation. And then I'll move on to what I am doing now. And then if I have a bit of time, I'm going to talk about some of the key skills for a legal career and also going through your legal education if you choose to study law. And then I'll just talk about some life tips that I have found useful in my journey. So that's basically how my talk is going to look like. So what I've just done, please, Gemma, thank you. Next slide. To be or not to be, that's a statement in terms of Hamlet. And when I was very young, probably as I just started secondary school, my parents basically are academics. Well, my father has passed on. But one of the things he asked me was, what do you want to be? And I said, well, a lawyer, a journalist, or an academic, because obviously I had role models in terms of in the academia. And I remembered my father saying to me, journalism doesn't really pay, so maybe you should just stick to maybe doing law. And he also said to me that maybe think about being a judge. So these are sort of the goals I had when I was much younger. And as I went on, I found law quite interesting, and that's what I chose to study. So to be or not to be, the career goal was to do law. And it's interesting right now that I have also transferred to the academia. And I'll sort of talk about how I made that journey, or how I transited to the academia. So please, next slide. So this is a bit of my educational background. As I said, I started off my journey in terms of law in my home country, Nigeria, and went to one of the staff schools in Nigeria because, as I said, my parents worked in one of the leading universities in Nigeria. And then my father took a sabbatical year, so we went off to Connecticut, Middletown. And if I can remember, I can't remember anything nasty about that. I found it a very pleasant experience. And then when I came back, obviously continued with my primary school education and then did my common entrance examinations. Nigeria sort of models itself sometimes after the English education, so did my common entrance examinations. And then went on to the top girls' school in Nigeria called Queen's College. So it's a unity college based on our Civil War experience. Most federal colleges are unity colleges. So the whole concept of the unity college is just to make sure that we all sort of understand our commonality in terms of the different groups. And then I moved on to university and did my LLB degree in the University of Benin, which is one of the much more younger universities in Nigeria. And then went straight to my national youth. So in Nigeria, we have this mandatory youth service where you go into a boot camp. So you go into the camp, you're sort of drilled by military men, and then you have to do this mandatory 1-year service. And so that's what I did. And my 1-year service was spent in the Ministry of Justice, and I'll be talking about that shortly. So I just went straight into work. And then, of course, family life, sort of got in the way. And I'll talk about that also. But family life is also part of our journey. And so before I started my youth corps, the mandatory year, in Nigeria, we have again after you've completed your law degree, if you want to go on to be a barrister or a solicitor in Nigeria, you have to go through 1 year of the Nigerian law school. So that's what I had to do. And then I got my bar degree, my professional degree. When I moved over to the United Kingdom, and that's why I'm described as a dual qualified lawyer, I did the qualified lawyers transfer tests. And so I have admissions. I'm a solicitor, although I'm non-practicing in England and Wales. And then because I moved over to the academia, obviously doing a PhD was very important. So after many years of not being in school, I came back as a matured student and did a PhD in the Cardiff University. Now, most of my professional background has been in commercial corporate law, but I chose something different in terms of my thesis. So my thesis focused on involuntary childlessness. Sometimes women in some parts of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes when there's an issue to do with infertility and childlessness, involuntary childlessness, there's always that concept that it's probably the woman's responsibility. So I was fascinated in that area, and that's what I did my thesis in. So social stigmatization of involuntary childlessness, and whether there's a justice case for access to reproductive technologies, in other words, fertility treatment. So that's what my thesis focused on. And so please, the next slide, Gemma, thanks. So that's a bit of my educational background. So let me just talk a bit about my work roles. As Jo said, we all have our interesting, unique stories in terms of what we've done so far in terms of our legal careers. So as I mentioned, I had to do that 1-year compulsory youth service, and you don't get to choose where you work. So I was posted to the Directorate of Public Prosecutions for 1 year, and I worked as a legal officer. And I worked with the Lagos State Ministry of Justice. So part of what I did in terms of my work role was giving advice to the Commissioner of Police, deciding whether there was a case that should go to court. That's pretty much a lot of what we did. And then also prosecuting cases in court. So that was my National Youth Service, my sort of baptism into the legal career, into law, into the legal profession. And then I moved on to what I wanted to do, which was corporate commercial law. So I got a job with one of the leading commercial law firms in Nigeria called Chris Ogubanjo & Co. and worked there for a couple of years. And what I did there was strictly in terms of corporate commercial law with a focus on energy law. Then I took a gap period and I did quite a bit of volunteering in my local church, and then came back in terms of to become a legal consultant. So I was self-employed for some time, focused quite a bit on knowledge management. So I provided some consultancies to, again, the Lagos State Ministry of Justice and then some other firms. And then I moved on to become a contract lawyer in Mobile Producing Nigeria, because I've always been interested in oil and gas, and worked with them for a year before moving over to the United Kingdom. So Mobile Producing Nigeria is an ExxonMobil upstream subsidiary. But obviously, again, because of the whole notion of fossil fuels and all that, there's more of a move right now to renewable energy. So if you're thinking about a career in energy law, probably you should be thinking more about renewable energy. Thank you very much, Gemma. Next slide. And so when I came over to the United Kingdom, partly for family reasons, coming over to join my husband, I thought to myself, am I still going to have to practice or work in the industry? Wasn't that straightforward? So interestingly, sort of going back full cycle, remember my childhood dreams, become a lawyer, judge, journalist, or get into the academia. And so my career here, I sort of made a transition to the academia. So I worked for some time in a research center in the Cardiff University called BRASS. It was funded by the ESRC, and the focus of BRASS was on the intersection between environmental regulation, sustainability, and business relationships. And I found that very interesting. And one of the projects I worked on is a project called Law and Your Environment. And that project was funded by the United Kingdom Environmental Lawyers Association, so UKLA. And it was really a very interesting project. And there's a website, a public website, which grants access to environmental information. So that's a project that I worked on. And then I moved over to teaching, working as an LLM tutor in the Cardiff University, teaching again at the master's level. And I helped to develop the module in oil and gas law. And then I got a good job with the University of Buckingham, first as a lecturer, and then became a senior lecturer, and was one of the founding co-directors for the Center for Extractive Energy Studies in the University of Buckingham. And I also sort of worked also as a visiting lecturer with the University of Birmingham at the postgraduate level, again, teaching oil and gas law. So that's what I've done so far since I've come to the United Kingdom, since I moved over to the United Kingdom. So the next slide. And so what am I doing right now? My current role is as program director, the pioneering program director of the Cardiff Met LLB program. And so a range of things I do. I lead on the program development. I lead also on recruitment, enrollment, and admissions. I'm focused on ensuring that our students' experience is meaningful. In my work as a senior lecturer also, obviously, I do a lot of things to do with learning and teaching, and I teach on a range of subjects at the undergraduate level, and then teaching English legal system, taught law for year 2, and these are just some of the things I do in my role. And then, of course, quality management and providing pastoral care. So that's a bit of what I do in terms of my role as a program director and as a senior lecturer in law. So that's a little bit about myself in the few minutes I have to give this presentation. So I just want to talk about some key skills that I think would be very helpful if you're thinking about embarking in a career in law. And so obviously one of the key things will be reading and studying, research skills. And it's not just for your legal study, it's also necessary in your career. Law involves quite a bit of research, and the quality of your research will sort of help in terms of the way you think. And of course, law gets you to apply quite a bit of critical thinking, and I'm sure you're already doing that right now in terms of in high school. So you've got to ask lots of the why questions. There's never just one side of the argument. So law gets you to really sort of think out of the box. So analytical thinking and critical thinking is very important. So always asking those why questions. There's never one side of the argument. And then problem solving, and I'm sure problem solving, that's something I love. So it's an innate part of me. I'm always trying to think about how do I sort of resolve this. So I find the career of law very fascinating. And then, of course, social skills and communication, written and oral, reflective skills, thinking, you're also investigating things, scrutinizing things. So you don't just take things at the surface level. And that's very important in terms of client management. And then, of course, commercial awareness. So law never operates in a vacuum. Law operates in society. So there are lots of things that influence the shaping of law. And it's also important also to have commercial awareness, especially if you get into, if you're going to become a solicitor or a barrister. So commercial awareness is very important. So I know I've gone on for a bit, so I'm just going to conclude in terms of some tips that I've found very useful in my legal in my journey. The first thing is to aspire. So I love to dream. I know there are lots of challenges. Sometimes people wonder, is there a job for me? I just feel that you just need to be very creative. Don't let anyone put a box around you. You've got something unique in you. And so just continue to aspire. So what are your dreams? As I said, I had a few childhood dreams, and it's interesting that I've been able to fulfill some. And maybe, who knows, one day I probably will be a judge. So aspire, dream. And then, of course, with your aspiration, you need to be tenacious. So be determined. That's quite important. You've just got to, know that life is all about, it's a competition. And so you've just got to get that tenacity and that resolve to continue to go on. And then, of course, we all need mentors. Over the years, I've found out that mentors are so important. So mentors in school, mentors in your career. And I just want to shock you a bit. Mentors don't necessarily have to be people above you. Mentors could also be people, in terms of your colleagues. And sometimes you'll be surprised that you can learn from people who are maybe, so to speak, your juniors or much younger than you. But just make sure you get a good, sound mentor. Be very positive. Lots of times things will be very challenging, but be very positive. So have that positive and optimistic outlook. And then, of course, keep on pressing on. So sometimes failure, as I love what Oprah Winfrey said, that failure is not your destination. It's just part of the process. So if there's a failure, it's just get up and keep running the race. And those are just some of the life tips that I've found very helpful in terms of my journey as a lawyer. So I'll stop here and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Egede. That was fantastic. Wonderful of you to share your experiences, your career journey, but also your top tips at the end there. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions that our guests would like to ask later on. So if you do have a question for Dr. Egede, please put it in the chat and I'll pick those up at the end. And we'll look forward to returning and hearing more from you a little later on. But thank you so much. It's really inspirational.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Rebecca Sherwin. Rebecca is a former Shrewsbury High School pupil. She graduated from Staffordshire University in 1993 with a law degree, and she completed her legal practice course at the College of Law, Chester. Trained at a solicitor's practice in Shrewsbury before moving to join the law firm Gateley in Birmingham in '98. She progressed her career there very quickly, achieving partnership at the young age of 33, and she is now the national head of real estate. She lives in Shropshire. Her hobbies include interior design, modern art, and spending time with her husband, daughter, and Cavapoo Bertie. Her daughter, Harriet, joins us in September, and we're very much looking forward to that. So, Rebecca, welcome. Are you with us, Rebecca?
I think so.
Excellent. The floor is yours, Rebecca.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Ms. Sharrock and Gemma for inviting me to share my career and experiences as a solicitor with you all. I am an alumni of Shrewsbury High, although in preparing for this evening, I realised that it's actually over 30 years ago since I left Shrewsbury High, which makes me feel very old indeed. So firstly, I thought I would share my education journey with you. And Gemma, I think you've got my slides.
Hopefully, can you see Rebecca?
Brilliant, yeah. So if you just flick over to the first one, that's it, about my education. So I joined Shrewsbury High at the age of 4 years old. You'll see that I've deliberately omitted the year in which I joined the school, although I do remember the day very well, and my best friend then is still one of my best friends now. So I continued my education at Shrewsbury High until I was 16, and then I left to study my A-levels at Shrewsbury College. I realised that I did omit to add on the slide the qualifications that I gained at Shrewsbury High. I did leave with qualifications. I was the first year to undertake GCSEs, and I left with 9 GCSEs. Looking back, it was a difficult time transitioning from Shrewsbury High, where I was with my friends and I knew the teachers and their subjects, to a new school where I didn't know anyone. I also made it very difficult for myself by selecting A-levels that I wasn't familiar with and which challenged me academically. However, it was in the first year of my A-levels that I chose to study GCSE law. And after spending many an afternoon watching trials at Shrewsbury Crown Court, this set the foundations for me in choosing to pursue a degree in law. So I got the grades to study a law degree, and whilst I only moved into the next county of Staffordshire to go to university, partly because of a boyfriend who I dumped in the first couple of weeks, I moved into university accommodation and I embraced life as a law student. Sometimes it was difficult when friends on other courses had fewer lectures and assignments than me, and there were times when I thought I would never be out of the library doing legal research. But I loved those 3 years, and having undertaken some work experience at law firms during the summer holidays, I knew that the next step for me would be law school and then on to be a solicitor. So after a 3-year law degree, I moved to Chester to complete the legal practice course, and the purpose of this course is to train you on the practical side of being a solicitor, so how to negotiate draft documents and letters, how to interview clients, and also to the practical side to completing a corporate or property transaction. And it was when I was at law school in Chester that I secured my training contract at Hatcher Rogerson in Shrewsbury. Now, after being 4 years away from home, I'll be honest and say that I wasn't ecstatic about coming back to Shropshire, but the UK was in a recession and a lot of law firms were reducing the number of trainees that they were taking on. So I knew that I was very fortunate to be leaving law school with the certainty of a training contract. So I started my training contract at Hatcher Rogerson Solicitors in a sleepy town of Wem, where I gained experience in criminal law, family law, and property, or real estate as it's often known. And whilst it was watching those trials in the Crown Court during my A-levels that gave me a real interest in the law, and I'd worked at the Crown Prosecution Service in my university holidays, I soon realised that being a criminal solicitor wasn't for me. The same applied to family law, and it only took one case of working with a father, trying to get him access to see his children, that I knew that there were some aspects of the law that I found too emotional. After 6 months in Wem, I moved to Shrewsbury to work in the real estate and corporate teams of Hatcher Rogerson, and I knew then that it was in corporate real estate that I would want to pursue my career. I liked that in a corporate real estate transaction, the parties all have a common goal, whether it be selling, buying, or developing a property. And I also liked that I was acting for companies in either expanding their own business premises or adding to their property portfolio. Certainly for me, in acting for companies, there wasn't the emotion that went with working on a family or criminal or employment issue. So within a few months of moving to the corporate team in Shrewsbury, 2 of the partners announced that they were setting up their own niche real estate and corporate firm called William Hatcher Partnership at Claremont Bank, and they wanted myself and a colleague to join them. So I moved from probably what was one of the largest law firms in Shropshire to a firm of 2 partners and 2 assistants. Next slide, please, Gemma. So I transferred my training contract to William Hatcher Partnership. I qualified in 1997 at the age of 25, and I really enjoyed my time there, but my now husband was working in Birmingham. He would tell me about the £1 million deals that he was working on, the celebration completion dinners and the buzz of the large city law firm. And it wasn't long before he encouraged me that working in a city law firm was for me. And that's when I moved to Gateley in 1998. And I can honestly say that I've never looked back. The experience at Gateley was very different to the firms that I'd worked at in Shrewsbury. The work was more complex, the clients were more demanding. I was introduced to recording my time electronically, and instead of finishing working at 5:30, I finished work when the partner or associate said I could go home. However, I was in a firm with a staff of hundreds, and in some ways it was like being back at university with a lot of people my own age, working hard, but also having great fun along the way. And I did work hard. I worked long hours, and I still do. And working through the night wasn't uncommon. And if I wasn't working late in the office, I was out with work colleagues and clients. But the hard work that I put in enabled me to pursue my career as quickly as I could, achieving associate when I was 29, senior associate at 31, and partner at 33. And the same year of being made a partner, I got married, so a double celebration. My career goal was always to be a partner. And for me, I knew that I wanted to be a partner before I had a family. So I had my daughter in 2009 when I was 37. And I only had 5 months off on maternity leave before returning to work full time. I should say that the choice to become a partner before having a family and returning to work full time were my choices. There were very few female partners or female role models in the business when I had my daughter. And for me, I felt that I needed to be a partner so I could be in control of my work and client demands. As to working full time, I had seen other women struggle to ring fence the days that they were at home with their children, and where there were client demands, they often ended up working on their days off. So 2 years after becoming a mum, I was asked to head up the real estate unit nationally. And whilst this would mean further demands on my time, it was a great opportunity and I embraced it. and I continue to be the National Head of Real Estate, which is spread over 7 offices. It's made up of 80 staff and 17 partners, and as unit head, I'm responsible for delivering a turnover of in excess of 10 million. Next slide, please, Gemma. So I thought I'd share this final slide just to give you an insight into my role as a partner in a corporate law firm. So as well as managing the real estate unit nationally, I specialise in real estate finance. So my clients are banks who lend money to investors of commercial real estate, such as student accommodation and shopping centres, as well as lending to developers of industrial parks or residential housing estates. And my role involves, so firstly, supervising and training. So I, with others, will have a number of solicitors working with me on a transaction. And it's not unusual for me to be instructed by a client on a Monday that they're funding a company purchasing a shopping centre who needs to complete the following week. So I will work with a number of solicitors within my team, reviewing documents. I'll delegate tasks and supervise the team to ensure that we achieve completion within the deadline required. And yes, this can involve some late nights. And over the last 15 months, whilst all of the staff at Gateley have been working from home, lots of calls on Microsoft Teams. Secondly, advising on the law, as you would expect. And at Gateley, we have regular training from our professional support lawyers, informing us about the changes in the law to ensure that we're giving the right advice to our clients. But it's important to appreciate that our clients are paying us for our advice. So they don't want us to tell them what a particular section of the Law of Property Act says. They want us to summarise the law in a way that they will understand. So verbal and written communication skills are really important. Mentoring is now very important in legal business. And as partners, we want to get the best out of our staff. We want to know what the aspirations of our team are, and we help them to achieve it. So we have a number of mentoring schemes at all levels, and I currently mentor 2 women in the business to help them with their career progression. I've mentioned representing at business events and winning new work, because probably one of the best parts of the job is meeting new people, getting to know your clients more and celebrating the work you've done. And as a solicitor in a client-facing role, you need to be personable and approachable and engage with clients. But this is often very easy as you get to know your clients very well when you're speaking to them on a daily basis. And many of my clients have become good friends. Client management is also important. You'll have many transactions going on at the same time. And whilst you may be working towards a particular deadline, deadlines can change, and sometimes overnight. Being a solicitor is about prioritising work, keeping clients informed and juggling your day. A solicitor needs to be very organised or have a very good IT system or a very good secretary. And then if you choose to progress your career through to partnership, there will be management responsibilities as well as working with clients. So for me, I conduct appraisals for the 17 partners in my unit, as well as appraisals for my team. And I collaborate with the partners in my unit as to the growth strategy of the business over the next 5 years, as well as setting financial targets and marketing budgets. So I hope that I've given you an insight as to my journey, what it is like to be a solicitor in a city law firm, and some of the skills I think a solicitor needs in order for you to make that career choice the right choice for you. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much. That was really insightful and so different from our first speaker as well. So this is brilliant for the girls watching to get a real insight into the different types of career you can have within law. And it was really exciting hearing about the busy city law firm. And although the hours sound long, they sound like they're very fulfilling and interesting. So we're looking forward to asking you some questions about that at the end of our presentations. Thank you very much. I would now like to welcome Esther Schutzer-Weissman. Esther is another SHS alumni who graduated from the University of Oxford, highly regarded criminal advocate, known for her sharp mind, high quality advocacy and expertise in the conduct of very complex cases. She was recently reappointed as standing counsel to the Insolvency Service. Her practice actually spans all areas of serious crime, but with a focus on fraud and regulatory work. And she has a great deal of experience in human rights law, having worked at the European Court of Human Rights. Esther is described as being extremely bright, fierce and devastatingly brilliant. So we are fortunate indeed to hear from her directly tonight. Esther, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I think most of that comes from marketing material, so you can take it with a big pinch of salt. What I'm going to try and do is to share my screen. So if I try and do that now, and you can tell me, or somebody can let me know whether it's going to work. Is that working? Can we all see that?
We can't yet.
Just see if it does.
We still can't see it at this stage.
Hang on a second. Let me just give me one moment.
Of course, no rush. The joy of Microsoft Teams, unfortunately.
You can still just see that. Let me just, oh, hang on. Try again. Well, sadly, what I can't do now is see you. So let's try another. Let's try again. Share options. Screen.
There we
Now,
go.
can you see? Right.
Can see your screen
Okay.
now, and you as well.
That's good. Let me just make sure that I've got the right thing up. Here we go. Can we all see that?
Yes, we can see that now. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So I am, as you pointed out, a barrister. I'm a criminal barrister. So most of the work that I do is, I suppose, the kind of thing that you might see on television. If we then go back a little bit to where I started, I did start at Shrewsbury School, at the high school rather. I was there between 1989 and 1993. So when Rebecca says it made her feel quite old, you can just imagine how old it makes me feel. I did A-levels there in English and history and Latin. I obviously spent some time on my academic subjects, but I think it's probably fair to say that one of the things that characterised my school time, and something I'm incredibly grateful for, is it was a time entirely devoid of stress. There was a sense of understated ambition, and that other people were much more important than oneself. And that allowed me to do a lot of more collaborative things in my spare time, music in particular and drama. At that stage, I had absolutely no concept of being a lawyer. In fact, I had no concept of ever doing any work, to be fair. I thought somehow that life would come to me. And I think if somebody had asked me what I was going to be, I would have said with great confidence I was going to be a film actress. I did, however, go to university. I was at Oxford. I was at Somerville College, which was, for the first 2 years I was there, an all-girls college. It was a choice I made deliberately because partly as a result of my career at the high school and also my general feelings of confidence, I felt an all-female environment was conducive to both academic study and a feeling of support. I studied something called Literae Humaniores, which translated into normal language is classics. In fact, it meant that for the main part of my university education, I did philosophy, modern and ancient philosophy, and ancient history. I think it's also right to point out that I had a fabulous teaching and academic support at university, but I probably squandered most of it. which is to my very great shame, there were an enormous number of models who I then was able to access, however, much later on in my life. And I'd say in the past 10 or 20 years, I probably had much more to do with my university and my college than I did when I was there. The one thing that stood out, and the one thing that I think made a great big difference to me as a human being, was that in that college, there was a sense of strong female leadership and a real aspect of realistic leadership. The college and those who ran it understood the world around them didn't stay still and that one needed always to adapt. That's precisely what it did when it allowed men in. And can I say I was one of those people who protested on the streets against it, but they were right and I was wrong. And that sense of adapting to surroundings and keeping up with the world around you has stayed with me all my life. I then did what's known as a conversion course. And unlike the eminent professor who started us off, as you can see, there were two routes into law. You can either do a law degree, I didn't do a law degree, or you can do another degree. And if you do another degree, you have to convert it into a law degree. That is a year-long course, which is pretty intensive, but it tells you very clearly whether you're going to be a lawyer or not, let's be fair. You then do a professional qualification. That's where lawyers divide into barristers and solicitors. I went down the barrister route. And then you do on-the-job training, so a training contract, such as Rebecca's just told you about, and in my case, pupillage. There are, of course, advantages of both the law degree and doing another degree. I was given quite strong advice, and I give quite strong advice, depending on the people who ask me for it, about what those advantages can be. For some people, the science of law is what attracts them to the profession. For some people, it's about the people. For some people, it's about the confidence of having a law degree. For some people, it's financial considerations. Certainly, when I look back on the choices I made, I feel very fortunate that I didn't do a law degree, because I have certainly drawn on my own background at university in much of my professional life. I then moved into pupillage. I got a pupillage at the chambers I'm now at, which is called 6 KBW College Hill. It was at that stage a very traditional criminal chambers in the Temple, a very beautiful cloistered place, but pupillage is not known as the year-long interview for nothing. I don't know whether any of you have watched things like Our Friends in the North, that probably dates me a great deal, or Silk, things like that. They're not too far off the mark. What did I do? I photocopied all night. I fetched people's dry cleaning. I bought people endless lunch and coffee with money I didn't have, and they certainly would have had. I spent more time on trains running up and down the country than I will ever spend or want to spend again in my life. I hardly ever slept. I partied extremely hard, though often with people I would never meet again. I was attacked by my clients. I was assaulted by colleagues. And I had to learn a rather odd and arcane language of what it is to be a barrister. Now, that all sounds incredibly unappealing. Pupillage has changed. It's one of those adaptations and transformations which is so important about the legal profession. But it did certainly give me a very good training in what it is to be a barrister. It's hard work. It can often be on the face of it unfulfilling work. You are a servant. Certainly as a barrister, you're very much a servant, not a master. You have a brief, you follow it, and you can ask as many questions as you like, but ultimately, unless you part company with your client, you have to go along with whatever nonsense they think they want to persuade you is in fact the case. You also have to get along with everybody. People you will never have met before, people who are mentally unwell, people who are physically disadvantaged, people who don't speak the same language as you, people who have very different expectations about who you are from the reality of who you are. who have very different expectations and experiences of the justice system and of life from that one you have had yourself. When I became a barrister, my mother in particular was extremely unhappy, and she tried to express her discontent by explaining that I was her daughter and that she didn't want a child of hers to become aware of those aspects of life which she thought I could remain innocent of all my life. And obviously I was pretty grumpy about this and thought she was being utterly unreasonable. But again, with hindsight, a wonderful tool, I think she had reason. I did learn a lot about the sides of life which made me feel shocked, distressed, ashamed, and militant. Some of those things are good things, some of them are not good things. They're all things we have had to deal with. Moving on, I was taken on as a tenant. I did pass that year-long interview, and I became a tenant. That's what it looks like, a set of chambers, just as traditional as you might imagine it looks. We are a set of 47 people who are joined together under one roof, but we are all self-employed. We are all solely responsible for our work. We can do work for other people, and then we're responsible for it too, and for their reputation as much as they're responsible for my reputation. In that 47, there are 14 who are women, and that is a much higher proportion than it was when I entered there in 2000. As I imagine you know, the upper echelons of barristers are called silks, or Queen's Counsel. There are 17 in my set, and only 3 of those are women. It becomes harder and harder as you get up the ladder. A lot of people, both men and women, do sort of drop out or fall back by the wayside. And certainly when I started in my career, I was asked questions like, are you going to get married? Are you thinking of having children? And that sounds shocking. Of course it sounds shocking. It is shocking. It would never happen today. But it did come from a compassionate place, because to be a woman at the criminal bar, to be a woman at the bar, to be a man at the bar too, but particularly now more so than it was before, it is difficult because you need full-time support for any kind of realistic family life. And you have to choose that is what you're going to do. Now, I chose 6KBW. There are millions of different chambers up and down the country. I chose it because it had women high up and women who were silks. That was at the time extremely unusual in a criminal set. It had a lot of academics in it. It had a reputation for fierce excellence. It did a lot of legal aid work, and it both prosecuted and defending. And as a criminal barrister, I thoroughly believe that it's important to do both. You don't know how to build a house or prosecute unless you know where the weaknesses are to bring it down, defend. So turning to my career since then, I have done magistrates lists. That's when you turn up at a magistrates court. If you're lucky, they let you in and only ask you what your name is and ask to look inside your bag. Sometimes they refuse to let you in because they don't believe you are who you are and they have to look up online. You then spend all day there with file after file being presented to you pretty much as you're having to make your submissions about them. You think on your feet, you learn swiftly how to do it. I then, as Ms. Sharrock said, I then spent some time in Strasbourg working at the European Court of Human Rights. That was, again, a very interesting experience. I think it was probably quite useful in reassuring me that I was supposed to be a criminal barrister in the United Kingdom and didn't want to be either an academic or a human rights lawyer in Strasbourg or on some of the international war crimes tribunals. Since then, I've done all manner of cases. I've done cases that last a year. I've done cases where I've been preparing for 10 years. I've done cases that are a day long. I've done cases where people have been sent to prison for their life, cases where people have shouted with joy, cases where people have ended their lives. I did a case which is known as the English Al Capone case, where I had my house and the house of all of my family alarmed, and I, at that stage, had an Austrian flatmate who called me one afternoon to say, is it right that every time you burn the toast, there are people in uniform who come up in about 3 minutes flat to put the fire out? I had to explain that wasn't quite usual, but I couldn't really tell him why not. I prosecuted a case involving the person who was known as the man from Del Monte, Nadir, and we spent 4 years prosecuting him. He was convicted, and then he was sent back to Northern Cyprus. And the day after he was sent back to Northern Cyprus, he was paraded through the streets on the back of a horse as a returning hero. I've done many cases involving rape and children, gangs and children, comedians and celebrities, frauds and corruption. They are everywhere. But like all of the speakers so far, my work in court is only in one aspect, albeit it is the larger aspect of what it is to be a criminal barrister in my world. I write books, I contribute to articles, to updating work. I do quite a lot of outreach work, both pro bono work in the legal and judicial profession, and also in schools and with young people. And for me, that is an incredibly important aspect of being a barrister. It gives you the ability and the arena in which to reach people that I'm not sure I would have otherwise been able to do. There are definitely challenges. Like with every profession, there are challenges in the legal profession. We wear odd clothes. We do look ridiculous. I used to find it quite enervating, but I now find it incredibly reassuring. I love the fact that I go into court. I cannot be recognised after I leave court, after I take my wig and my gown off. I look completely different. I can be on the same bus as the person I've been prosecuting, or whose family I have just failed. And more importantly than that, nobody knows how young or how old I am, how inexperienced or how experienced I am. There are enormous expectations. People think you can work a miracle, and people think you can do nothing to help them. And those expectations are both a reward in their own right, and they're also deeply frustrating. There are attitudes that are preconceived from all over the court, both from the judges, I'm sure they would allow me to say that, from your colleagues, your compatriots, and your adversaries, to the clerks, to your lay clients. Those are the people who are in the dock, or your victims, and your professional clients. And there is the challenge of a work-life balance. As I said, this applies to every single profession. The work-life balance, I think, is something that I will say a little bit more about in a moment. But just as I said that adapting is one of the critical skills that I learned and appreciated at university, that is certainly something which I see most clearly in the work-life balance. I've had to adapt myself, and the world has been adapting around us, has it not, during COVID? And then, of course, there's the nature of the work. It is hard. It is very rigorous. It is unrelenting, but it is incredibly rewarding. And sometimes it feels too much. And that's when you have to recognise that, as I will say in a moment, that you need to get your balance reset a little bit. So those are the challenges. However, we overcome those challenges. And that, I hope I can say with absolute confidence, is one of the greatest rewards of my career so far. There has been a complete transformation in the life of a female criminal barrister since I started in 2000. And that is in a very short period of time, in 20 years. When I first arrived at 6KBW as a pupil, I had just had a call the night before from the people who had left just before me. And she said, Esther, you don't know me, you'll never meet me, but I need to tell you something. And you need to write this down, and you need to follow it to the letter. You are only allowed to wear skirts. You are only allowed to wear black. You have to wear shirts with collars and with cufflinks. Your skirts must be just below the knee, but no shorter and no longer. You must wear high heels, and your tights must be tan tights. Otherwise, people won't take you seriously. You're expected to be here no later than 7:30 in the morning. You will never leave before 7:30 in the evening, and you will be here for the full part of at least one of the weekend days. I genuinely thought this was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. Now, that obviously doesn't happen anymore. That's what I mean by transformations. There are also an enormous number of support mechanisms around that just simply didn't exist when I started. And as I said, the transformation in 20 years has been staggering. We have a maternity policy. The bar now requires every chambers to have a maternity policy. You may think it's extraordinary, we didn't, but that only came into force between 5 and 6 years ago. Every set of chambers does wellness training. There are mentors and those responsible for people's well-being in every set of chambers and at the bar at large. There are also structures and groups designed to assist particularly women. There is, for example, Women in Criminal Law. There is the Female Law Association. There are very structured and less structured mentoring groups. And now, whereas it used to be the case where you would just have one person you might go to in chambers, typically your pupil master, the person you worked with, your leader or your colleague, now you have actual mentors who are put in place to help you. So I'm going to return to work-life balance. And I'm going to start with a few things which I think are very good pointers for anybody in any job, but particularly important I have found in being a barrister. The first I've titled The Curse of the Self-Employed. If you're self-employed, you only ever earn anything when you're working. And if you're self-employed, and certainly I'm not alone in this, you think that the minute you finish a job, you'll never get another one again. So you have to constantly line up lots and lots and lots of pieces of work ahead of you to make sure that you have got a stream of work coming in and you're never going to be left alone and unloved and unemployed. That, of course, is utter nonsense, but I'm afraid it is that curse which besets people. The next thing is priorities. Priorities is, well, it's a word that is easy to write and it's easy to intend, very hard to put into practice. In my personal case, it was forced upon me. I have 2 children, the eldest of whom was becoming very ill about 3 years ago. We didn't know what it was. It became crystal clear how very ill he was about 18 months ago. And that forced me to adapt, and it forced me to really list what were the priorities in my life and then to structure my world around those priorities. The next thing is confidence, because a lot of the problems that a work-life balance gives rise to are the result of a lack of confidence. Confidence in yourself, confidence in your business, confidence in those around you, and confidence in the value that you can give beyond your own 4 walls. And I would commend to all of you not necessarily to think of confidence as just being self-confidence, but confidence in that much wider sense if you're interested in pursuing a career at the bar. Then compassion. Well, again, this is compassion to your family. It's compassion to yourself. It's compassion to your colleagues and to your clients. If you're very overstretched, you're not really looking after your client who's instructing you. If you're really overstretched, you're going to be shouting at the dog instead of taking for a walk. And that is a very critical aspect of maintaining a good work-life balance, in my view. And then lastly, community. That community is something that supports you and is part of something that helps you to support others. And it is there, although sometimes it can be quite hard to see it. I was toying with the idea of giving you an example of a day in the life of. So what, for example, am I going to be doing tomorrow? And I'm obviously a little bit nervous. You think I might be making it up or fitting it to this talk. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do tomorrow. It is utterly, utterly true. And obviously, I can't tell what odd and unpredictable things may come up because that's the nature of my work. They often do. But as it stands, I'm going to have a run in the morning before the children get up. When I come back, I will get them up, give them breakfast, take them to school. I will then check a piece of work I've almost finished and send it out. I will do some emails and catch up on some administration work. I will start work on a piece of sort of ongoing work on a 3-year fraud case I'm doing. And then I will see a friend for a dog walk. I will have lunch with my husband. And then I will do handover for a trial that I can't do in 3 weeks' time. I will travel into London and prepare for a conference with a client at 5 o'clock. And then after that, I'm going to do some client entertainment. So that is my day. It will start at 6 and probably finish at about 11, albeit some of it is fun, not work. And then lastly, then, a few tips that I was given, tips I pass on, and I've put it under the heading of Altiora Petimus. I did study classics, so you can hardly forgive me if I rely on it. We seek higher things. We all should. We all deserve them, and we all strive for them. And that, in my view, is a good motto to live by. Firstly, don't sweat the small stuff. I was given that advice about 4 years ago, and it has stayed with me, and I wish I had been given it many, many years before. Be honest about yourself, be honest to yourself, be honest to others. If you're honest, it is the most disarming way to get yourself out of a pickle. And if you're honest, you will be in fewer pickles than you might otherwise be. Be kind. You have no idea who the person speaking to you is or may come back to be in your later life. And lastly, courage is part of being human. I was told when I was about the age of, I suppose many of you girls who may be listening, that I would never make university, that I would certainly never go on to a professional career. And I'm afraid I thought, stuff you, what do you know? But it did take a certain amount of courage along the way. And I truly believe there's nothing unusual in that. That's just what it is to be human. I'm very grateful to Ms. Sharrock and to all of you for listening and to inviting me to make this talk. Thank you very much.
Esther, thank you. Thank you so much. That was fascinating, unflinching, honest, inspirational, and wonderfully hopeful at the end as well, when you told us how much had changed since you yourself sort of entered the profession. I know there will be lots of questions at the end, no doubt, and we look forward to speaking to you again shortly. Thank you. That was incredible. So I would now like to welcome our penultimate speaker, Ella Rees. Ella is also an SHS former pupil, head girl. She has a first-class LLB law degree from Nottingham University, and she is still currently studying for the LPC, but she has secured a training contract at Allen and Overy. So clearly a bright and promising career ahead of her. We're delighted that she's been able to join us midway through her studies. Ella, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ms. Sharrock. Hi, everyone. So I'm currently studying for the LPC, so my final exams start next week. Gemma, are you able to do the slides, or do you want me to share my screen?
I'll do it for you, it's okay.
Thank you.
Ella, good luck, and with only a week to go, it's doubly impressive that you're here.
Thank you. I'm also going to have to bear with me because I sound a bit ill. I've actually currently got COVID at the moment, but we're rolling with it. It's fine.
That's very impressive. Thank you for still turning up.
No, that's all fine. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to everyone tonight. I miss school a lot. It doesn't seem like a minute since I was here, so it's good to be back. So this is me on my very first day of school and my very last day of school. I was at Shrewsbury High School from 2009 to 2016, and I was head girl in my final year. I had the best time at school and I got involved with everything. And I think that's a really good thing to do in general. Academics was my strong point. I wasn't very good at sport or music or drama, but I did them all anyway. I just did it because I enjoyed it. So my A-levels, I did French, Spanish and politics. And I think that I kind of knew when I was choosing my A-levels that I wanted to do law. I did work experience at a law firm after my GCSEs in year 11. So I did have a good idea that that's what I wanted to do. But I think, as has already been mentioned, law is quite a nice subject in that it doesn't really matter what A levels you do, and that takes quite a lot of the pressure off. And in terms of why I chose law, I think it's a really hard question to answer, actually. And I still don't have a great answer for it, even though I had to answer it on my personal statement and then again with job applications. But I think essentially for me, it's related to my A levels in that I loved the problem solving and the puzzle of modern languages. And I just enjoy language in general, which I think with law, when you're reading legislation and you're trying to understand kind of what does it exactly mean and what is the law, there's a lot of puzzles and language in that, which I really liked. And then I have just a wider interest in society in general, which is why I did politics A level. And I've always been interested in politics and still follow it closely now. Obviously, law is made by politicians and is kind of implemented in a background of politics. So the two are very much combined. I've also put up some just book suggestions on there. I think that's helpful if you're about to write a personal statement or just in general. All of those books are accessible for any age. They're just interesting. Know the City is very much related to commercial law, which is so my training contract at Allen & Overy. It's a big commercial firm. Then Helena Kennedy is a human rights lawyer, and she looks at women in the justice system. So they're really interesting. And Law in Action is a podcast, used to be on BBC Radio 4, and it explores all kinds of different legal options. So if you're interested in law and you're wanting to learn more, that's something good to listen to. So then next, I was at University of Nottingham. I started in 2017 and I graduated last year. I had a gap year, if you've noticed the year that's lost, which as a side note, I would really recommend. I loved my gap year. So I graduated last summer in the middle of the pandemic. I left uni unexpectedly last March and did my finals from home. So that was a bit of a strange ending to uni, but we made it through and I graduated with a first. I had the best time at uni and I absolutely loved it. But it was difficult at times. I think law isn't the easiest undergrad to do. And I definitely felt like I was doing more work than anyone else quite a few times throughout the 3 years. The lawyers are definitely working hard. But I enjoyed it the whole way through pretty much. And I'm really glad I did do law as my degree. I think I knew I would. And one of the things on top of what I discussed earlier was just that I wanted to do something that was completely different and was a challenge. I didn't do law A level or anything. I'd say most people haven't when they get to uni, so everyone's in the same boat of it just being completely new. But that does make the first year particularly quite challenging because you're learning a whole new language. You've got lots of legal terminology. You're trying to understand how to interpret legislation, which is often, I don't know if it's fair to say not well written, but it's not the easiest thing to read. Learning how to write legal essays, it's a completely different style to being at uni. And then on top of just being away from home for the first time, meeting new people, it's a lot. And there was definitely times when it's hard. And I think there's a whole aspect of uni that people don't talk about so much that is difficult. But I did have a really fun 3 years. And I think you have to make the most of it whilst you're there. I definitely did my fair share of partying, probably too much, particularly in first year, but you have one opportunity, so you may as well make the most of it. I think one thing to mention, though, is that with law, it's so competitive, as is most things now, but particularly getting jobs. So you apply mainly in your second year, and they do look at your first year grade. So although most universities, your first year doesn't count towards your final degree, it is worth getting good grades because they do look at it. But I was able to go out 3 or 4 times a week and still keep my grades up. So it's definitely possible to do both. And then I've got on there, find your passion. I think this is quite an important point. I'm not someone that thinks you should do things for the sake of a CV. I think it's a really bad way of looking at life. You obviously have to keep an eye on CVs and job applications when I was doing them in my second year, you need stuff to draw on, you know, tell me a time that you've been in a difficult group situation or you've used your initiative. So you obviously need to have done things in order to be able to answer those questions. But I think life's too short to just do things because you think you're ticking a box or you think it's going to be impressive. There's so many things at universities, societies, and just endless. You'll be able to find something that you really love and want to do. And that's better on two grounds, really, because A, it's more enjoyable for you, but B, in terms of when you are looking at it from a job application point of view, it's much more impressive if it's come from a genuine place rather than being able, so the interviewer will be able to tell you were just ticking a box. So I did quite a lot of volunteering at uni with homeless people and also with refugees, which is something that I care about a lot, and I've continued with the refugee volunteering since and throughout my LPC, and that's something I hope to keep doing. So that brings us to kind of now. So I'm currently, as Ms. Sharrock said, doing my LPC. So it's usually a year's course that, as the others have mentioned, is your kind of practical qualification after your degree before you start your job. And everyone has to do it. So although I'm going into commercial law, you do it if it's family, criminal, it's the same course. But because I already have my training contract, they're putting me through it. It's quite expensive. So most people get the job first and then the company will pay for you, which is obviously a massive advantage. But I'm doing it in 6 months. So I started in January and I finish in a couple of weeks' time. So it's been really intense because it's accelerated and it's condensed down. And it's also all been virtual. I have actually met some of the people in my group. Most people are in London. I moved down anyway, just because I was kind of ready for this next stage of life. I'd been back at home in Shropshire for the last year almost, from when I left because of COVID from uni. So I was just ready to, this was always the plan, was to come down to London. So I thought I would do it anyway, which I think has been a good decision. And people are about, and we've been meeting up, which has been really nice, because I think that's one thing you've missed with the virtual learning, is that everyone usually would have met their colleagues before they start, which is quite a nice safety net. But it has been, although it's been intense, I've really been enjoying it, because the practical side of it has been quite different to undergrad, but you can also really see how it's going to feed into the job, which has been nice. I've popped up there Magic Circle, so that's the name. I didn't have a clue what that was before I started uni. It's essentially the top 5 English commercial firms in the country. Allen and Overy is one of them. So I'm really fortunate to have that as my training contract, and I had a couple of options, which was nice. I've got a lot of friends that are still struggling to get training contracts. It can take people 2 or 3 cycles, so it is a challenge, and that can be quite demoralizing, and applications is a long process, but it's definitely possible. And most people tend to get that through a vacation scheme, which you do as a sort of few week internship at the end of your second year, and you hope that you convert it into a training contract. But quite a few of the firms, so it's worth thinking about early, do first year schemes. And I know Clifford Chance, which is another of the Magic Circle firms, has a virtual internship for 6th formers, which is Ready Set Law, which I popped up there. It's new, so I've never done it, but that's worth having a look at. Any experience you can get is really great. So that brings everything for me. I'd just like to finish by saying, don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think school is a really hard time. This last year has been really hard, and it feels like there's lots of decisions to be made. But there's time, and it all sort of falls into place eventually. And just enjoy the moment. I think it's really good to set goals, obviously, and to work really hard towards them. But you have to enjoy your successes when they come. Otherwise, you're always just working for the next stage, and you never get to enjoy the moment, which is worth enjoying. My email's there, so I think we're going to Q&A at the end. But if anyone has any other questions, please do feel free to email me. I'm always happy to chat.
Ella, thank you so much. Thank you for such an inspirational talk, given your exams coming up and the fact that you have COVID as you speak to us. But I think what you've shown again is that resilience that seems to be a common theme amongst all of our speakers tonight. And it's really exciting to hear about somebody who is at the start of their career and with such wise words at the end. So we look forward to hearing a little more from you later on. Last but far from least, I would like to welcome Sarah Cox. She's also a former alum of the High, attended Royal Holloway University to study geography, and then Birmingham University and the College of Law. Worked at Terry Jones Solicitors, qualifying there in 2007, and moved in 2012 to a Surrey London firm, and then back to Shrewsbury in 2015, to Lanyon Bowdler, and then Hatchers in 2018. She is an associate solicitor, mother of 2 boys, and apparently a big fan of pizza and Prosecco, which I have to say, I agree with you, what a marvellous combination. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, hi, thanks for having me. I am going to share my screen if that's all right, but I've got 2 screens because I'm working from home. So if you can't see it, right, if you can, right, hang on, where are we?
Yep, we can see that.
If I start the slideshow, bear with me, this is.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, can you
see we've got it.
Thing on a screen, or can you see lots of things?
We can just see the PowerPoint and you.
That's great. I've got the notes on my other screen. That's fine. Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name's Sarah Cox, and I am, as Ms. Sharrock says, a alumni of the school. I was 1992 to 97 and did my GCSEs with the high school and did really well. Found them very, very easy, but that's where academia sort of didn't become easy for me. I did leave and go to an all-boys school with girls in 6th form, which probably wasn't the best thing that I ever did for my academic situation. But I don't regret things in life, and I wouldn't have met the friends and had the later experiences that I had. So I left Shrewsbury High with 10 GCSEs and went to Adams Grammar. You'll see that I did art subjects effectively, but as other people have said, and particularly Ella, you can do any subjects you want to the law. It's very versatile. This was the first experience when I think my resilience first had to pitch in. I didn't get my A-level results that I needed for law at Leeds University, and I'd always wanted to do law. So I went into clearing. Now, I haven't researched what happens nowadays, but I presume it's similar. I then had to find a university that I wanted to go to that either did law or did something else that I was happy to do. I chose geography, which is my favourite A-level. I went to Royal Holloway because it was considered a good university. Again, another resilience test. Instead of a 2-1, which I was predicted, I got a 2-2. At this point, law was still really important to me, and I knew I wanted to do it, so I applied to Birmingham University to do the conversion course, which is what a few people have mentioned. I got there, and I haven't mentioned there, but I came out with a very high grade, one of the top in the year, and it instantly put me back feeling very positive that law was something that I should have done from the very beginning, but circumstances conspired against me, and that's what I'll always say, not my own fault. And I then went on to do the College of Law and got a distinction. This all happened within a few years, and it tested me quite severely, actually. I lost a lot of confidence. I lived at home when I was at the University of Birmingham and the College of Law of Birmingham, and my parents were very supportive in building that confidence up. The next was the hard part. As Ella said, securing a training contract is difficult, and when you haven't got the best grades at A-level and degree, your GCSEs are forgotten about, unfortunately. It does become a lot harder. I was very lucky that I spent a lot of time in Shrewsbury doing work experience over the summer, and Terry Jones took me on as a legal assistant for 6 months with a view to a training contract. And indeed, I was offered a trainee role, and because I'd done 6 months already, I only had to do 18. In the end, I had lots of applications put into local firms, and I got 3 offers of training contracts and chose Terry Jones because of his I suppose the way he supported me in the very beginning and got my career on track. The roles I particularly had in a small regional firm rather than a large corporate one was everything from going straight into client meetings, having never really done one before, to then coming out, making the tea and photocopying and scanning. Things are no different nowadays. in that you still have to do those roles. And I, as an associate solicitor, still have to do that as well. I make tea for my trainee solicitor. I do the scanning and copying if that's what's needed. I don't know whether that's a regional practice rather than a city-based practice, but that's how things work on a smaller scale. So on the job, a couple of words of advice. I did 4 seats, which is ideally what you should do. And you really need to think about those 4 seats. And if you can have an input, then speak to your principal about that, because this is the point where you really decide what area of law you'd like to specialise in. Once you get further down the track, it's really hard to change your discipline, because you are more senior, your salary is higher, you have a lot of managerial responsibilities. So as you see, I did residential property and commercial property sort of conveyancing. I then did housing law, which was my court seat, which was not for me. I was definitely not meant to be in front of a judge. And then I did a small amount of wills and probate. And finally, in 2007, I became a solicitor. It had been a long slog, but at that point, I had risen quite quickly. And as soon as qualification, I ran a team of 3 people on qualification and started to get people headhunting me, which gave me a massive confidence. I did stay at Terry Jones till 2012, and I was an assistant solicitor till I left, although I had strong managerial responsibilities. It was an unusual setup. I moved down to Kingston upon Thames with my husband just after we married. He's always worked in the city, so was commuting up and down from Shrewsbury to London. It wasn't going to last forever that way. So we moved down and I started a job again at a regional firm, but had offices in Canary Wharf. And I did a lot of moving into commercial property, particularly in Soho, acting for trust companies who owned properties in Soho that rented out both commercial and residential elements. I had to do a lot of wining and dining, a lot of marketing, which I actually discovered that I enjoyed. I'm not one that would go down the route academia. I'm definitely a practical lawyer with a bias for marketing and business development management, which has carried me through for the last 13 years. So I left there and we came back when we offered a job to run the north for my husband. So we moved back to Shropshire, and then with 1 child already in tow and another one soon to be on the way, I carried on with commercial property at Lanyon, and then decided that I had spoken to someone at Hatches about heading up a new team that purchased, they dealt with plot purchases of new build properties, and I now head a team of 4 that we deal with a lot of the developments around the Shropshire area. It's very, very busy, and as you can imagine, you've probably seen, anyone local to Shrewsbury, the amount of developments going up and how much work we have to do. I became an associate last year with a view to partner in the next 5 years. As you can tell from the other speakers, I'm a bit older than the rest at getting associate. So I became associate at 39. And I do think that I made the decision to put my career slightly behind my husband's, purely for salary reasons. It wasn't his, I had no pressure. It was purely that he was the main breadwinner, and my career was always a regional firm, not the big city earners. Had my 2 children because I was already in the zone that I was going to do that, and now they are both at school, and my career can now take off. They are still young, they're still 7 and 5, so they still require a lot of my time. So I only work 3.5 days a week. It is hard, really hard, to work part-time and be a sort of a team leader with managerial experiences and running the marketing team for the whole of the property team. I have to often log on in the evenings, and I'll probably be logging on after this for a couple of hours, and I have to log on early in the mornings. And I work on my day off, but that is life, and I love my job, and I now feel it's my time to become Sarah again and not just mummy and wife. You can have it all in that you can work and be a mum, but you do have to set your priorities out, and sometimes it's family and sometimes it's work, and with support around you, you can manage it. I've talked about that, I'm gone. So I thought it might be worth having a few positive statistics, and then maybe sort of some that you may be a little bit concerned about. So I was quite surprised that there were more women overall than men as solicitors. In regional, I'm not surprised. Where we are, there's mostly women in my practice who are solicitors, and there are a smaller amount of men. You'll see that training contracts in 2019, over 4,000 out of the almost 6,500 were offered to women. So we are definitely succeeding in law because we are ambitious and we're organised and we can do two things at once. However, if you look at the second paragraph, women only make up 19.6% of full equity partnerships. Again, that was a bit of a surprise to me because in my firm, we have equal numbers of female and male equity partners. So there is no disparity in that. I hope the second one will change very, very soon and start to come down quite dramatically. One major firm in the city has admitted to paying their female staff. That's equivalent, not just the partners, so everyone at each level, 75.3% less than their male counterparts. They haven't gone into detail of what that's about, but just the sheer scale of it is quite concerning. The only way that we will get past that is for women to put their careers first or decide that they want to have a career and go with it. And what Ella's doing is a major thing. In fact, all the women that are speakers today will make a big difference towards equality coming in. When my mum was one of the first women in the 70s to campaign for equal pay at British Aerospace, which was definitely a male-dominated environment, she got told when she got pregnant with me that she'd just put women's rights back by 2 decades. Hopefully, people don't see that anymore. And with maternity laws and things coming in, we can have a balance. You just have to decide for you, and there's no right or wrong, what is more important and at that time. Law can be lucrative, but it's also very punishing, involving long hours, particularly in the large city firms, as the others have said. I often work longer hours at certain times, but other times I do have days where I finish at 5 o'clock and I go home and I go for dinner, or I take a lunch break and I can go out and have an afternoon off with the children or family. That's the beauty of a regional firm. I don't earn the big salaries, but I have a work-life balance that works for me. If you look at, they're saying to make partner, you need to do about 2,000 chargeable hours. Whether that's true or not, it's still a lot of pressure in the city. And if you are somebody who likes a very balanced work-life balance, you need to decide which sort of law you go into, high street like I have, or the very exciting city life. You have to do what's right to you, for you, and then decide which route of law you go down. My biggest passion was always that I wanted to have it all. I thought I could have it all. I'm going to Shrewsbury High, where women can have it all and come out feeling that confidence. It was something that I could never understand that I wouldn't get. It might have taken me a long time, but I now feel that I have a successful career in law. I'm competing with men in my sphere, and I am encouraging the next generations. I've not experienced any overt sexism or restrictions purely because of my gender, but the statistics show that overall there are some issues. It is it's a rewarding job, and I never clock watch. So good luck. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. A different path again, but no less interesting or inspiring. And thank you for addressing some of those sort of big issues that might be on our girls' minds about balancing work, life, motherhood. But actually, it's really wonderful to hear that the school gave you the confidence never to give up on what it is you want, and quite clearly that is coming. It's really exciting. So can I perhaps invite all of our speakers to turn their cameras on so that we can see you all on screen? And then can I invite questions into the chat? No doubt there'll be a huge number flooding in. We've had a few, which I'll start with, but if you do have a question, just pop it in the chat, and then I'll try and make sure that we can either address it to the correct person or perhaps hear from everyone if it's a broader, more general question. Firstly, thank you so much to all of you, and it's wonderful to have you all on screen at the same time. We did have a question quite early on that was in the first instance directed to Dr. Egede, but I think might be relevant to all of you, which was, what is the most interesting aspect of the particular type of law that you do? So whether it's commercial, criminal, what's the most particular particularly interesting aspect of the law that you do? And I don't know, Hephzibah, whether you would be happy to start that off for us.
Yes, Mike. Thanks very much, Jo. As I said, quite a bit of my life has been involved in commercial law, especially from the aspect of oil and gas law. Now, I come from the Niger Delta in Nigeria, so that's an area where you have quite a bit of oil activity going on. So looking at gas flaring and all the things that went around oil and gas, I think that was one of the reasons that sort of created a passion to get into that area of law. So just seeing the impact on what the oil and gas sector does to communities. And quite a bit of my research has always been on that. So I'm a person who's really sort of interested in aspects to do with social justice, how big companies affect communities and people. So that's something I'm very interested in. So when I talk about commercial or corporate law, I'm not just looking at it from the angle of acting for big companies, although I worked in mobile producing Nigeria. I also want to see, yes, these big companies have to provide development. These things help in terms of the economy, but what's this knock-on effect in terms of the communities, the host communities where they work in? So that's the angle that I've always taken in terms of things to do with commercial law or corporate law. So it's not just working for big companies' interests, but also seeing it from the perspective in terms of the impact they make on the day-to-day living of the communities that they work in. So that's really sort of what motivated me to get into corporate commercial law, but from the angle of oil and gas law. And as I said, oil and gas right now doesn't seem to be a very attractive thing today because of this whole issue of climate change. And we saw it in terms of gas flaring and all that. So yes, it's positive to do commercial law, but I'm also interested in it from the justice angle.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Rebecca, are you happy to jump in there? And somebody's added an additional question. What are your tips for finding out which bit of law you might be most passionate about? I guess it's easy once you've done a number of it, but how do you choose?
Well, I guess in answer to the first question, for me, it's probably finding solutions to some of the issues. So acting for banks, you know, we will often find issues that maybe the borrower, the bank's customers, solicitors didn't pick up on. And, you know, we don't point to score. We're there to get that own goal, that goal that everyone wants of seeing that transaction get to the end. So for us, it's finding a way around some of the issues, some of the legal issues, and give commercial advice so that it's a win-win, and hopefully the customer will then go back to the bank for more money and also instruct us. I think in terms of the second question about finding that sort of that key area, that passion, I think you probably know what kind of personality you are. And for me, whilst it was the criminal aspects that I would watch on the telly, like Esther said, you know, I'd watch all the Barrister criminal films. But I think when you get into the practical side of it, for me, I knew that I wouldn't sleep at night if I was dealing with some of those issues, and certainly some of the stories Esther said, I definitely wouldn't sleep at night. So whilst it doesn't mean I'm no less emotional or sensitive going into the corporate arena, for me it was definitely suited to my personality. And whilst I will work late and maybe my mind will be ticking about legal issues, it's not an emotional side.
Brilliant, thank you. Esther, are you happy to jump in? I think you're still on mute, Esther.
I certainly am happy to answer those questions. So far as the first one's concerned, I think all along the thing I found most fascinating about criminal law is that you really do sit at the fault line of society. And quite often in your cases, you see how society is in the process of changing both its ideas about itself and its ambitions for itself. And I did a case many years ago now where I was prosecuting a very famous cricketer for corruption, and there was a packed courtroom when the jury were going to come back in and give their verdict, and they gave their verdict, and there was a sort of a huge expression of surprise. And I saw the judge, who I know quite well, almost send them back out again to check whether they were right. So surprised everybody, which of course you're not allowed to do, really not allowed to do. And that was a sort of case in time, just watching society having changed on something really quite fundamental, which is, you know, what do you need as evidence of honesty? And that, as I said, I think that aspect of it is very interesting. It's always been very interesting to me. In terms of how do you choose, I think that is a difficult question, because if you're like me and have absolutely no exposure to the law except on TV, until you go into it and you don't do a law degree, how do you know? My conversion course taught me really quickly that I wasn't, although I now do spend an enormous amount of time drafting documents, I was not going to be very good at that. I'm much better on my feet. I'm much better at trying to understand people's stories, and I quite like an argument. And if you're like that, you need to be in a courtroom, and criminal law is where, you know, is where you get most courtroom. And most criminal lawyers are in court every single day.
Thank you. Ella?
Yeah, so it was quite a difficult one for me still. I keep having these kind of existential crises where I think, oh, maybe I don't want to do corporate law and I've made the wrong decision. So I think I'm still kind of in the midst of that at the moment. But no, all the work experience I've done, I've really enjoyed. So I'm confident that is what I am going to want. I did a bit of shadowing a judge when I must have been in sixth form. So I kind of flirted with the idea of criminal law a little bit. I did explore that avenue. I did a bit of work experience at a sort of personal injury firm. So I think just trying to take opportunities where you can and just get a bit of exposure to different things. I think even in just a day or two, even if it's just speaking to people, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal work experience. You get a sense of whether that's something you're interested in. And then I think eventually you just have to take the decision, and you're never going to know entirely, because until you're actually doing it as a full-time job, you can't possibly understand exactly what someone does. I'm still slightly in the dark about what I'm going to do in August, but we'll find out. But so you'll have an instinct, and I think you just have to trust yourself.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, would you agree?
Yes, I always thought I would be a family lawyer. No idea why, because I'm not particularly emphatic, and I sort of get a bit frustrated with people if they go on a bit. So it was definitely not going to be me to deal with people who were going through all these emotional crises in their family life. I quickly changed from the LPC to deciding that property and the structure of that was much more suited to me. I'm a very, very organised person, and everything in my life has to be very documented and in place. I like lists, I like ticking things off lists, and property law is very much like that. You have things that you have to look at on each transaction, especially in conveyancing. So I always knew that property was probably the best route for me. It was the most structured. In terms of what I find the most rewarding, because I've done commercial a lot and residential, it's very different types of work, and the clients are very different. Residential, you get a really lovely feeling when the clients who've struggled so hard either to save their deposit monies or to move up the scale, and they're going to a much bigger house, and they're very excited, and they're so overwhelmingly grateful that you have helped them with this. It's really lovely to feel that, because but it's on a small scale compared to a lot of the big things the other speakers are talking about. Commercial property wise, it's probably when you get something. When I dealt with the trust of this commercial property in London, and we managed to get, it's now quite ruthless, but get out the tenants who've been living above the commercial property on rent of £300 a month in a 3-bed duplex flat above a Chinese restaurant in Soho, and managing to find areas, the law that would be able to evict them. That was good. I got quite a good present for that one.
It's the problem solving again, isn't it? I guess you have to be incredibly creative. And one of the things that came across from all of you was the fierce competition that you have had to overcome to get to where you have got to. And we've had 3 or 4 questions asking, how do you make yourself stand out? And how do you deal with the daunting nature of that perhaps what feels like constant competition in order to succeed? I don't know if anyone would like to sort of start on that or give it a go. Ella?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I feel like I've done it all so recently. I think you have to try and not worry too much about the competition. If you start getting bogged down in the numbers, it's overwhelming. I know when the big firms go round to each university and there's quite a big recruitment drive, they come to you, they're looking for the best people. So it's a bit of a two-way channel. And they're telling you figures about, I don't know, 2,500 people applied for 20 spots. It's not necessarily what you want to hear, but that just is the reality of the situation. And I think it's pretty similar in a lot of the big city jobs, certainly in any field. So it's just trying not to get too bogged down in that and just focusing on what you can control, which is how you come across in an application. You can't control the number of other people that are applying. I think starting early and giving yourself time to do the applications in terms of application advice. A lot of the firms now are doing, as I said, first year schemes, and there's a sort of emphasis on the minute you get to uni, there are things you can be doing. I applied unsuccessfully for first year schemes, so it's not the end of the world if you don't get first year schemes. I was quite happy concentrating on my grades and having fun. I didn't put too much emphasis on it. But then in second year, I did spend most evenings till the early hours for the whole of my autumn term doing my applications. And then people that were giving themselves a couple of weeks, it's just not enough time because they take time to marinate and you write them and you rewrite them, and it's a really long process. And I found that I was successful with all of my applications, which was quite rare, but I had spent a whole term doing them. So I think it's the kind of the time you put in, you get out.
It's incredibly impressive, Ella, and probably a good lesson for all of us, actually. Well done. I noticed while you were talking that Hephzibah was nodding a lot, and maybe you're at the other end of it in admissions. What would you say?
Yes, I was nodding because in terms of standing out, I think one of the key things is just being able to tell your story. You're the best person to tell your story, really. So yes, your grades are very important in terms of maybe a university application, but when you make the personal statement, when you have to write up your personal statement, please sort of demonstrate clearly to an admissions officer those key aspects that would demonstrate that you have the competencies that we're looking for in terms of studying law, for example. So I think it's just being able to demonstrate. Let me just give you an example. Let's say, for example, you've got some work experience, then demonstrate how that work experience, what you've done in the work experience, what competencies you've developed, what skills you've acquired. So it's not enough maybe to say I've worked in construction. Demonstrate how those projects you've done in construction have helped in terms of maybe problem solving. So you're the best person to know how to communicate that personal statement. And I probably would say, don't just go to the internet and just get a personal statement and then send it to us. Build up demonstrate the things you've done and the skills that you've been able to develop in terms of your different aspects of your work experience or maybe your educational experience. And I know sometimes it's difficult to tell your story because most of us sort of are understated. So, but you just have to sort of market yourself and demonstrate why maybe you want to pursue that particular educational goal that you have.
Brilliant advice. Thank you. Sarah, you've got your hand up. Something to add?
Yeah, I think because my grades weren't the best, it was something that I had to really address in the applications. Clearing wasn't an issue because I went straight through and got the place at Holloway. But when I was going for training contracts and things, I had to force my way into a meeting because on paper, I didn't look as good as other candidates. With my A-levels weren't as good as I thought, and I had the 2-2. The LPC and the CP got me in the door for these interviews, but going into the interview, I had to create a very personable interview technique. So I would talk very, very openly and very relaxed, and I spent a lot of time how I sat, how I didn't use my hands. I didn't wring my hands very much. I felt so, and I asked for feedback for all of those, because I knew that on paper I wasn't going to get the training contracts that other people would. And not everyone is academic, but would still make good lawyers. Some of the best lawyers I work with aren't great academically, but have worked their way up, and they have strengths. So your strength is somebody else's weakness, and their strength is your weakness. And a law firm needs all of these people to work together. So don't ever feel disheartened if on paper you don't quite match up to certain individuals. You get into a room and you might wow and surprise them.
It's brilliant advice, Sarah. Thank you. Rebecca, I know you're involved in recruitment quite heavily, aren't you? Do you have any top tips?
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably just be yourself. You know, I think law is one of those areas that you can be very technical, you can be very academic, you can be very personable, you can be in that client-facing role, or you can be in that role where you're doing some very technical work in the room and have very little client interaction. So for me, law will suit absolutely everyone, and I think there are certain law firms that will suit certain people. So, you know, yes, the academics are important. And as Sarah said, you know, if you haven't got those academics first off, then you have to show yourself and showcase yourself in a different way. But I think there is definitely a role in law for most people and most personalities. And sometimes if you're not successful at a particular firm, it's not suited to you.
It's great, thank you. Esther, any major differences in if one is pursuing being a barrister?
Well, I interview both pupils and people who are applying for pupillage and those who are applying for tenancies who have been pupils in our set. I've done so for many years. I am a great believer, as your other speakers have said, in being yourself. You can tell, I think, I'm afraid, almost as soon as somebody walks into the door and walks through the door and into the door and starts speaking, whether or not they're a real whether they're a real prospect. So I think that comes from a sense of being yourself and being honest about who you are and not having to hide behind anything.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious of time, but we've had a question that I think would be really interesting, perhaps as a question to finish on, if everyone would be happy to answer it. One of the things that has come across tonight is how incredibly hard you all work, which I think we probably all knew, but actually to hear it, you know, in the hours and the time and the devotion. Somebody has asked a question: how do you know that all the hours and hard work that you put in are worth it? So if you're happy to answer that, would anyone like to start us off? Rebecca, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I don't think would you be happy to start us off on that one?
Sure. It is a really good question. It's a good question to ask, and it's a good question for someone to ask in an interview, because it's one of those ones that's flummoxing me. I guess for me, it's, you know, we are a service. You know, we're providing a service in the area of law that corporate is in. So for me, it's when the client is really appreciative, when the client is saying, I can't believe we did it in that time, thank you, or, you know, and just appreciation, I guess. I would probably say that, you know, I would probably just add that hard work, you know, my husband's a lawyer. I think it's actually very useful that my husband's a lawyer, because he understands the hours that I do. So certainly when I was going through my career, there would be times when we had a dinner planned or we had events and, you know, I had to cancel it because I was working. And, you know, so I think it's important that your family appreciate those hours and appreciate the nature of the work. But yeah, for me, it's the thank you and being appreciated.
Brilliant, thank you, and thanks for going first on a difficult question. Sarah, would you be happy to answer that?
Yeah, I think, as I said, my area of law is very procedural. So when it's done, it's done. That's it. So And I'm not very good at reassessing my costs, and I just keep going for the client and going for the client, and then I feel bad I have to up my fees. For me, until the job is done, that's how far I'll go, and I keep going and I answer all the calls and emails. And so to know to when it's done, that's the amount of hours I need to do. It's just part of the job. I don't know, it's not conditioning, but after 20 years of doing it various guises from work experience up to now, the hours I can start work at 9 and finish at 5 at times of the year. So very quiet times in property are January. I get a lovely January where I get a lunch hour and I'm not really doing much. Unfortunately, this week is pretty horrific because of the government stamp duty, land tax. So we are all working about 10 hours a day and weekends, and 3 of us have young children. So, but when the job is done, that's what it needs. So if it needs 8 hours, it needs 8 hours. If it needs 20 hours, it needs 20 hours. And that's just the only way. When the job is done, that's when you know the hours are worth it.
Brilliant, thank you. Hephzibah?
Thank you. Just listening to the other speakers, it's quite interesting because you find out also academia, there are lots of hours to, sometimes people think that academia is a bit light, but the teacher's work never stops. And you also find yourself working very long hours, especially when you have to prepare for lectures. And now that we're on Teams, in terms of the virtual work we do, you're doing quite a lot of pre-recorded lectures. And so you can work again in the early hours of the morning. So there's never really, it's rewarding, it can be tasking, but at the end of the day, you have to also set boundaries, as we've all said. So there must be some boundaries where there's time, that work-life balance I think Esther mentioned. So it's difficult sometimes to juggle everything. I know that we're supposed to be very good at multitasking, but what I've found also is just setting those boundaries sometimes, that I need some time to, focus on my family, focus on other things that I find interesting. So it's just trying to sort of get that right balance. But in terms of law, whatever you do in law, it involves quite a lot of work. If you're going to research, you're going to have to spend those hours researching, and you probably find out you're working till 3, 4 in the night in terms of trying to get out a paper or something or the other. So it's not just city firms where you're working, or in terms of practice, anything you're doing in terms of law takes a lot of work, but it's rewarding in the end. But set boundaries, maybe that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Esther?
I think being a lawyer in many ways is a real privilege, because you get to do extremely varied, interesting work. You learn all the time, and you have access to some of the most fascinating aspects of human life and experience. But with that comes both great reward and great responsibility. And I think the answer to that question really lies in 2 parts. One is, when it's not worth it, and when you need to reset, and when you've actually wasted your time and sometimes even your client's time. You also know when you've done a good job. And I'll be frank, as a criminal lawyer, there's a great tendency to think you can bluff it, and you can ride by the skin of your pants on all these things. And sometimes you just have to do it. But I tell you what, that is the most scary and unnerving experience. So I would say that being a lawyer, with all its hard work, is definitely worth it. And the hard work always pays off, and you personally feel it's rewarding as a result.
Brilliant, thank you. Ella, I know that much of this lies ahead for you, but given the stage that you are at, what would you say? Because you've been working incredibly hard as well, albeit in a different way.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been just how much I enjoy it. It's rare for me to wake up and not be looking forward to what I've got on that day. And I really enjoyed all my lectures. I enjoyed all my modules. I think that's slightly a personality trait. I look for the good in things. I tend to enjoy everything I do. But I had friends at uni that I think chose law because possibly parental pressure, possibly because it seems like it's a good thing to do. Law has a bit of a kind of reputation that comes with doing a law degree. But I think definitely don't do law if that's your motivation, because my friends that didn't have quite so much enjoyment of the subject found it difficult. Whereas I didn't mind putting in the hours because I really enjoyed it. And I think that will probably continue when I start in August. You hear a lot of horror stories of these big city firms of just not ever stopping working. But I'm really excited to start and looking forward to the challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, and I know that some people asked some individual questions, and we will see if we can sort of forward those on and get them answered. I'm sure that everyone will join me in extending our heartfelt thanks to each of you for your incredibly inspiring and insightful, honest and practical talks. We've talked a bit about mentors, and I think about Sarah referred to, the sort of trail that you have all blazed. And so thank you on behalf of all of the inspiring, aspiring women who want to go into law, and you have made that much, much easier for them. And I think I would also say it's been very clear tonight that whilst a career in law is not an easy path, it is an incredibly important one and an incredibly fulfilling one, and you have really inspired us all. And I am absolutely sure that for some of our young women here tonight, this will have been a definitive moment in their path to a business in law. Thank you very, very much. I hope that everybody has enjoyed tonight. We will have another event in the autumn, and we will publicise that in due course. Can I, as a final point, just give a massive shout out and huge thanks to Gemma Parish, our Head of Careers. Without her, tonight would not have been possible. She is a wonderful woman, and we're very lucky to have her. Thank you, Mrs. Parish, and thank you to each of our guests. Have a very happy what is left of Wednesday. Thank you. Goodbye.